the family ghost in my house, there's 168 hours in a week. If you weren't there during the right 10 minutes or so, he'd completely miss it, right? And it wasn't even weekly, right? So it's not, these things don't perform on command.
Keep watching to learn more. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be taking a look at the unexplained through the eyes of journalism. My guest is Steve Volk. He currently serves as a Stoneleigh Fellow with Resolve Philly. In this role, he is working towards transforming the way child welfare is reported on by deepening the media narrative and elevating solutions. Steve is a 20-year veteran Philadelphia journalist who has dedicated his career to telling the stories of excluded and under-resourced communities. He has garnered local and national attention for his writing on racially disproportionality and elevating the needs of older youth in foster care. His byline has been featured in the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philadelphia Magazine, The Washington Post, and Rolling Stone. He is the author of Fringeology, How I Tried to Explain Away the Unexplainable and Couldn't. Steve lives in Philadelphia, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Steve. It is a pleasure to be with you today.
It's a pleasure to be on here, Jeffrey. Lots of years of watching, and it's great to be with you.
You wrote your book, Fringeology, many years ago, but I'm under the impression when it comes to the paranormal, things haven't changed all that much. The basic issues that existed 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago when I got involved are more or less the same as they are today.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable because every once in a while something happens and I think, oh, this might make the ground shift a bit. But I don't think it fundamentally does, and certainly not in my field, in journalism. I think we still tend to keep this subject at arm's length. We restrict a lot of it to kind of Halloween-style reporting, right? And make sure to include some jokes in the piece a lot of the times, to show that we're not taking this too seriously. And I think we really, in the mainstream sort of media, does itself a disservice by not taking these subjects seriously. You can have fun with them, but I think they deserve to be taken seriously.
Well, let's begin with how you would define the paranormal, because it's such a huge area. It includes things that are very hard to take seriously, like paranormal hitchhikers at the Pentagon.
Well, it's anything that's not explained by conventional science, right? that seems to be happening outside the bounds of what we take to be a consensus sort of normal reality that we're used to. Certainly paranormal hitchhikers would fit the bill, ghostly hitchhikers. I try not to, I try to think of this more in terms of, as a journalist, right? You can capture somebody's story anecdotally, and then there's a step you can take beyond that to try and like confirm it, to try and determine whether or not people are pulling your leg, or perpetrating some kind of hoax. And it's been, like I said, just my experience that if we cover this at all, we do it superficially. And I think, it's funny because I was reflecting on this a little bit earlier that I think part of the reason might be natural in the sense that obviously nobody wants to be made a fool of. There's also, you need a kind of scientific background a lot of times to try and parse your way through these things. And as journalists, we tend to be lacking that.
There's a very interesting case study in your book that I think exemplifies the problems involved in even attempting to discuss this phenomenon for a popular audience. And that would be the case of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, who was a prominent psychiatrist, was listed in Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the United States. And yet, at the same time, seems to, according to your reporting and every other report I've read, suggests the same thing, that she got taken in by people who were basically conning her.
Yeah. It's a kind of a recurring theme in the book, and I think a recurring theme just sort of in this field, that when you experience something that's truly anomalous and something that you cannot explain, your filter may get busted. Your filter can get cracked, and it becomes easy to be hoodwinked. There's a story in the book as well that I think maybe reflects it more succinctly. There was a constable in Texas who had seen the very dramatic Stephenville lights, right? A UFO sighting. And when you talk about the core experience with him, it was clearly powerful, and it was clearly something you can understand why he had trouble processing it, right? But the next thing you know, he's out in the backyard with his cell phone, and this is 15 years ago, Jeffrey, what were the quality of those things then, right? He's out there with his cell phone trying to video lights, distant lights that appear as just the tiniest dot on his screen. And he is saying that these things, which are so different than that core anomalous experience, are somehow of a piece with that, and they weren't. And with Kübler-Ross, to your point, she was first person, so to speak, boots on the ground, working with the terminally ill. She is one of the founders of the hospice movement. She is, to my mind, one of the most, I've had a lot of family members with terminal illnesses. She's one of the most important people in the history of the country. I don't know how deep we want to go with that, but one of the most important people there is. And she's getting those first near-death experiences before and when I say first, obviously, it's a phenomenon that preceded her, right? But we don't even have that name yet for near-death experiences. And so she's hearing these kinds of stories again and again and again from people, and she had trouble processing it. And so when she moved away from writing her book on death and dying, and is becoming like a world famous public speaker and constantly beset with information, and I hate to use the term woo because the skeptics do that. As far as I'm concerned, they can have it. But she's constantly being beset by that stuff, and I think by virtue of what she'd experienced that truly was paradigm altering, she didn't know how to slot everything else that was coming in.
It seems as if everybody around her, including her own husband, could clearly see through the scam that she was being the victim of. But she herself she was willing, I guess, to let her marriage go rather than to let go of this belief that she had in these people who were in effect humiliating her.
And I think that one of the things that happens is that if you figure what she achieved, right? She overcame a lot of opposition just to get people to pay attention to the terminally ill at all. And I don't want to say she won that fight, because I think it's still a fight that's going on to some degree, right? But she made huge advances in that fight. And I'm guessing, and from the interviews I did at the time, I mean, it was very difficult for her. It would have been very difficult for her to admit she was wrong, right? And so it becomes easier for someone sometimes to dig their heels in, because I think for her, or for the constable in Texas, to admit that these other things that they got taken in by even for a minute were in fact false would have been too difficult to do psychologically, because it would have undermined everything else. So I think, look, if you get into this space, you got to be prepared. And there was a guy interviewed in the book too named Lou Gentile, who was a ghost hunter. And, he goes, look, there is so much bullshit in this field. It is absolutely like you're going to be hip deep in it when you wade into this. And so it's like, I don't want to compare it to a scientific process necessarily, but you always have to be prepared to hold everything you come up against in that same skeptical light. And the thing is, a lot of this stuff survives that. It survives that inspection. And I think that's okay, right? I think that there are too many people who just sort of get freaked out when their worldview is challenged, and so we're locked in the same place we were. Do you mind if I riff on UFOs here for a second? Because I think that...
Go right ahead.
What we've experienced in recent years, right? We're having regular congressional hearings in which people with Pentagon cred and affiliations are coming forward to say that radar instrumentation and eyewitnesses, often multiple eyewitnesses and multiple forms of instrumentation, are agreeing that there was some object, or let's stick with the popular nomenclature now of UAP, right? Unidentified aerial phenomena, some sort of phenomena, right? That could be measured by the instruments and seen by the human eye to be doing things that none of our known craft can do. And we had the great New York Times reporting by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. And as a journalist, I thought, oh, wow, this is shifting things. But it really isn't, right? Because you're not getting regular coverage of sightings, right? You're not even getting regular coverage of these hearings in the mainstream media. And so it's all happening, but it's happening out of sight of most of the general public. And I think one of the things I shared with you is, like, look, YouTube's great because people can sort of trip down different alleyways and sort of wind up here, right, in this room hearing about this. But for the most part, on podcasts and these sorts of things, we tend to talk to each other. And what we really, I think, as a journalist need is that regular kind of mainstream coverage that we give other things. And what that requires us to do is just acknowledge that, issues like life after death, issues like whether or not we're being visited by aliens, are fundamental existential issues that people do wonder about and they care about, and they ought to be served as the same as other constituencies.
You've had personal experiences of your own that put you in a sort of awkward position of being both a reporter and an experiencer.
And there's a lot, Jeffrey, that I didn't put in the book. You know what I mean? Like, there's things that I didn't put in the book with the idea that someday I'll be writing more books, right? But you're referring, I guess, with Fringeology, you're referring to like the family ghost story I grew up with, which, I'll certainly never forget how it evolved for me over time. Like, I had, and I don't even remember how much of this is in the piece, but like, I had kind of a crazy uncle who would, when I would be going home when I was like 12 or 13, and say, "Oh, you going back to the haunted house?" And I wasn't even sure what he was referring to. And as I got older, it hit for me that, oh, those memories I have of weird things going on in the house, right? That must be what he's referring to. But I kind of put it out of my mind because it all happened when I was really, really young. But we had a banging that would go on in the house, particularly on Saturday nights, particularly after midnight. And to everybody in the house, it would seem like it was coming from their room, the roof kind of over their head. Our parents agreed, that was for those of us upstairs, the kids, right? Our parents agreed that it did seem to be coming from somewhere upstairs. And as soon as they got upstairs, it would stop. And it went on for some period of months. And I think what first turned me kind of against the organized skeptical movement is that I knew what the standard sort of trope of explanations would be, right? That, you know, you got creaking floorboards, you got a weirdly settling house, you got something going on with the plumbing, right? Like something like that is happening. And you've got a family that wants to believe. But you know what my family didn't want, Jeffrey? They didn't want to believe. They didn't want it to be a ghost at all, right? And they searched for even stupid explanations to try and push this away, right? So my parents, I remember this because my parents, one time when the banging was going on, we'd run downstairs because we were so scared. And we could even still hear it while we were outside. And my parents took us outside and were shining lights on the roof, flashlights on the roof, to see if there were, quote, raccoons jumping there. And I was so young that they actually told me that that's what it was. And they were like, do you see, honey? Do you see the raccoons? And I'm so little, I'm like, yeah. Even though I didn't see the raccoons because I didn't want them to think that somehow I couldn't see them, right? And so that whole idea, and this is, again, sort of to me the problem with the skeptical movement, the problem when skepticism is just sort of a reflex kind of debunking, is that it creates these caricatures out of people who've had experiences that just don't reflect reality. And so, like I mentioned Lou Gentili earlier, he took me out, quote unquote, ghost hunting, right? And we went to places where weird stuff was happening. And you know what, Jeffrey? In about half the cases, the people did want it to be a ghost. They wanted to think that there was something going on in their house that was, spiritual in nature. And we went to a few homes where, like, Lou figured out it was freaking air conditioning. You know what I mean? It was the ductwork, right? And we went to some places where you couldn't get an explanation. So about half wanted it to believe it, about half didn't. And it's those folks, right, that need to be recognized, because just like with my family ghost, I don't say that there was a disembodied spirit banging around our house. I don't know what it was, but you know what? I know the floorboards don't explain it. I know the house settling doesn't explain it. I know there was no plumbing in the ceiling, right? I know that there isn't an explanation. And I think it's that area we end up in of having to admit we don't know that is so uncomfortable for a lot of people. But it's where we're at.
Well, another thing that seems to be taking place in our generation is that more and more people are taking courses and studying to cultivate these skills themselves. You, for example, spent quite a lot of time exploring the realm of lucid dreaming.
I love lucid dreaming so much. It's one of my favorite things, right? That came out of that book. It was like a gift that the research for the book gave to me. And so, should I run people through it at all? Like what it is? You want me to? Lucid dreaming is the act of being aware you're dreaming while you're dreaming and acting on that knowledge, right? So when I do public talks about this, I'll ask people, how many of you ever realized you're having a nightmare and woken yourself up from it? And there's always a bunch of hands that go up because people do that. And in fact, even since I've learned lucid dreaming, there's a couple of times where I didn't catch myself and I did that, right? But to really be lucid would mean understanding, well, this isn't happening. There isn't something for me to be scared of here. There's no physical ramifications to this boogeyman. And so acting on that knowledge, true lucidity, right? True awareness, and instead engaging with the source of the nightmare, or if you have the power within your lucid dream, because sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, you could actually reshape it. You could just decide to go somewhere else. So lucid dreaming has been a huge boon to me, even in the years since, since the book came out. And what I like about it most is the ways in which it helps me bump up against some of these other areas, right? So in other words, just a few years ago, unfortunately, I lost my best friend. He died, and we bonded around music. Like that was a big thing for us, but we didn't have similar tastes all the time. Like we agreed on some songs, but not on others. And there was this one song I was really, really enjoying, and I just knew that John wouldn't like it, right? And I still now, if I'm hearing something, I'll think, I wonder what John would make of this, right? And usually, because we knew each other so well, I have an idea of what John would make of it. And I knew with this song, John wouldn't like it. And so I was listening to it a lot, though, because I was really enjoying it. And I had a dream that I was moving through this party. And suddenly that song came on. And it's very explosive sort of sound. It came on. And I had this immediate awareness, John's here. And I felt myself go into sort of full lucidity. And so if you haven't experienced this before, it is really like coming into the dream, right? You attain a kind of a physical feeling of being there that's far more real than the typical dream. And I looked over in a corner. I just immediately was like, John's here and I'm lucid. And I looked around and there he was standing in a corner, big smile on his face. And I go over to him and I threw my arms around him and I started to cry. And I'll give people, if you want some more tips on lucid dreaming, but I made sure to keep my dream eyes open because if you close your dream eyes, you are quite likely to wake up from the lucid dream. Lucid dreaming can be very unstable. So I kept my eyes open, which you don't normally do when you're hugging somebody. And I felt tears coming. And I actually asked him, I said, this is really you, isn't it? Because it just felt that way, right? He goes, it is, but I can't stay long, right? And so I hugged him again and I was just holding him. And, Jeffrey, the sensations, like the smell of him, right? Which I never really thought of as distinctive before. I don't know about you, but I don't go around smelling my friends, right? But it was the smell of John, right? That I hadn't really taken note of too much when he was alive, but now it was very, very apparent to me, this is John's smell. And after he said that bit, I won't be able to stay long. And I hugged him again and I backed off. He just kind of squeezed my shoulder, very John, gesture, and started off around a corner and was just gone, right? And I actually felt myself sort of come back out of the dream and woke up. And it's a little bit like the family ghost, right? Was that really John? I can't say that I know, right? But I can say that I had the experience of getting to listen to that song for a minute and hug John again and connect with John. So that's the sort of experience that lucid dreaming can give you. And if you're interested, I could talk to people a little bit about techniques to try and lucid dream.
Well, there's a lot to be said about lucid dreaming. I think the important point here is that as a journalist, any journalist is likely to have had some personal experiences that are going to color the way they think about the paranormal if they end up writing a story about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for a lot of people, they're going to sort of move to a default position, which I did it to some extent myself. Like I said, there's things I left out of the book, right? Because they were almost too much for me to maintain a posture, right? That I felt, colleagues and all this sort of stuff would accept. It would keep the questions from becoming too uncomfortable. And the thought was, you know what, I'll get to those things later. I'll write about those things later. And I think for a lot of people, it's easier to just stay in that space of, well, that was just a dream. But I don't know that it was, right? I don't know that it was just a dream, because it was really that powerful, and it gave me a sense of closure. It gave me a real world result that I certainly wouldn't trade. And so that's why I do encourage people to like venture into these territories, but be careful not to crack your filter, right?
Well, you go so far as to write in great depth about something called induced after-death communication, a form of psychotherapy that involves what might just very well be actual communication with the departed.
I'm almost curious, Jeffrey, to ask you a question. Do you think that I held that in the same esteem that I held other things in the book? You know what I mean? Like, do you?
I do. As a matter
interesting.
of fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I had more trouble with that one, and I'll tell you, to your point about personal experiences, it's in great part because my personal experience with it, while powerful in helping me move through like a traumatic memory, which is what eye movement desensitization and reprocessing does. For background on this, I mean, that whole chapter was based on this modality, right, of psychotherapeutic treatment, right? EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, where they have you recall a traumatic memory, and then, as Al would do, he had what he called, Al Botkin was the guy doing it in Illinois, and he was doing it with Vietnam veterans, and he would just take this pen and move it back and forth. He called it Dr. Al's magic wand, I think, at some point, where he actually had a wand. And he would just move it back and forth, and you're supposed to follow it with your eyes as you go. And people who are interested in dreaming will recognize, I think, right away, this is a movement akin to REM sleep, the REM stage of sleep, when your eyes are ping-ponging back and forth. And there's some, theory out there underpinning this that dreaming is to help you consolidate and move past memories and process them. And so maybe that's what EMDR is tapping into, right? This, you're stuck on a traumatic memory, and this helps you process it. And my experience with it after losing a brother-in-law to a terminal illness didn't ring as true internally, right? As what had happened with, like, let's say, the dream about John. And so I didn't have like kind of the same feeling for that I did for other things. But what's fascinating about it is it gave me the real world result, right? That I was having flashbacks to the hospital room where he had died, where I'd spent a lot of time. And suddenly the smells would come back to me, all this sort of stuff. It was really difficult to deal with. I got past all that. And these Vietnam veterans had incredible experiences where they were able to meet with fellow soldiers that they had lost in the war, who were friends. They met with people they'd killed, which a mind-blowing amount of healing for them to have that opportunity, right? To have the same sort of experience, even if it was only in their mind, right? As they would have if it had happened in real life. And so I'm glad in a way to hear, not in a way, I'm totally glad to hear that you couldn't pick up on, some of my skepticism around it, because I really wanted to honor the fact that it was working for them. It was producing a real world result. And I think as long as we keep sequestering this stuff off into the realm of assumed to be bullshit, we are denying people a lot of healing through various ways, whether it be lucid dreaming or EMDR, or frankly just meditating on a deceased loved one in your living room. You know what I mean? And trying to feel them or connect with them.
I thought you handled it very professionally, but probably the reason why I assumed you had a more positive attitude than maybe you actually did have is because I know something about this research that you didn't know when you wrote it. Because we've done a subsequent interview about this phenomenon of induced after-death communication, the Botkin therapy. It was in your book, you report Botkin really would like to see somebody research it.
Yeah. I missed this. I missed that this happened. This is great.
Yes, we did an interview with Jan Holden, who is a professor at the University of North Texas, or one of the universities in Texas, a professor of counseling and currently president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and she actually did a formal study and published it on Botkin's treatment and got positive results.
That's fantastic. I will check that out. I will share with you too, Jeffrey, that I think the other reason that it maybe my own skepticism didn't come across was simply that I saw people who were healed by it and who professed to it changing their life. And that's kind of all I needed, to take it seriously. And I also, it's one of those things, when you watch these ghost hunting shows, they go to a place for a night and supposedly something happens. And I've been part of a reality TV show, and I wouldn't put it past any TV producer to be like slamming stuff around the corner. And you know what I mean? And like making things happen that didn't happen. And if you compare that experience where they go someplace for a night, right, and stuff jumps off, to what happened in my family house and how long you would have needed to stay there to experience something. I knew heading into the IADC therapy or whatever it is that my doing it once or twice is not necessarily going to get me the result that it got people who are working with Botkin on a regular basis. So I tried to, I allowed for that as well. But like, think about it for a second. The family ghost in my house, there's 168 hours in a week. If you weren't there during the right 10 minutes or so, he'd completely miss it, right? And it wasn't even weekly, right? So it's not, these things don't perform on command.
Well, you also told Botkin's story, which was very powerful. The fact that he had worked for the VA for I think at least 10 years. He thought of himself as a failure, as a matter of fact, because the type of therapy he was doing was one in which he would have these veterans of combat relive their combat experiences, and he saw it was just making them worse. It was giving them more anxiety until he began working with the EMDR therapy, which is still, to my knowledge, unexplained. Nobody really knows how it works as far as I know, but it does work.
I remember him telling me and his clients telling me that like they'd have to peel themselves off the walls after exposure therapy. They were literally sitting war veterans down and showing them war movies. And look, I had other than those folks, I had the pleasure of having a friend when I was, he was a friend of the family. And he'd been in Vietnam, and he came over once for the 4th of July, and he was jumping every time a firecracker went off. And it really brought home for me what these guys, can end up dealing with when they go through that. And so the idea that you would purposefully expose someone to this, I know they claim some results, obviously, too, but it seems like an inhumane way of treating them.
Well, as I read your book, Fringeology, it seems to me that as a journalist, and in fact, as a scientist as well, there are two primary pitfalls. You're either going to endorse a phenomenon which is really an illusion of some sort, or you're going to fail to endorse a phenomenon. You'll try to debunk a phenomenon which is actually real and valid.
Yeah, I mean, those are the dangers, but like what I try to do with the book and what I'd encourage other reporters to do is to stay out of those as a reporter anyway, we can stay out of those traps, right? We can report the story. This is the story that the experiencer tells. We can talk to experts who might understand the science behind why they are reporting this. And we could try and be, I don't think objectivity is even remotely possible. I think it's a absolutely false notion that has been foisted on journalists and people. And I tell people up front, I'm not going to be objective. I will, because I'm a person with, you know what I mean? I have a subjective point of view, just like everyone else. It's unavoidable. But what I can be is fair, right? And so I will talk to the more skeptically minded, but with a scientific background, and those with a scientific background who say, hey, look, there might be something here, and quote them both. And so as journalists, we have a way out of this, and I think too often we're just not taking it.
What about the scientist who tells you there's definitely something here? We have 150 years of evidence.
I mean, it would depend upon the phenomenon, and here's the thing: I'd love to sit there and review the evidence with them, right? Yeah, and I will say, I do think, and I don't want to sound too arrogant with this, but you do as a reporter start to develop some kind of bullshit detector. You know what I mean? Like you start to figure out the tells of when somebody's got something wired in and they know it, and when they don't. And so I try to use that as well. And I think that one of the things that impressed me so much during the work for that book, and in the years since when I've had occasion to like interview some people who've experienced something, is they present in ways that are real. When you have someone talk without affect, it's often an indicator that, they're making it up. It didn't really happen. Maybe they're delusional. We had an experience. I did a TV show about 5 years back, maybe more than that now, 8 years back or so, for a History Channel. And there was a woman who was telling this horrifying story of being abducted and abused and all this sort of stuff. And she talked about it like with no affect at all. And there's one of two things happening there, right? They're either so traumatized by it that they go into this kind of numb state, right? Or it's complete and total delusion, And I think in either case, as a reporter, you have to be careful there, because I don't think you want to exploit somebody who's still dealing with PTSD.
I wrote a book you may or may not know about called The PK Man, very extraordinary phenomenon. And I did this study as part of a research laboratory, a private laboratory. The head of the laboratory was a very well-connected person in San Francisco. And the fellow I was studying had walked into the San Francisco Chronicle. He said, I have magic powers. There was a drought at the time, a very serious drought. I'm here to end the drought. And the guards in the lobby of the San Francisco Chronicle threw him out. And so he said, aha, I have to teach you a lesson. I'm going to use my powers to show you how wrong you were. And the next thing we know, 300,000 acres around Northern California have been burned to the ground by lightning strikes, which is what he claimed he would do. So my friend said, I have a good friend at the San Francisco Chronicle, a reporter. We'll meet him for dinner and you can tell him what happened. And so we're meeting at a very nice restaurant in San Francisco, and I'm just telling the story like it happened. This journalist got up and said, I can't hear any more of this, and he just walked out right in the middle of our dinner.
When you bring up the getting up and walking out, feeling like I can't get into this, right? Because it's going to I would think they're seeing a career threat. Right?
Could be that. The implication is, of course, he thought I was bullshitting him.
Yeah, and he couldn't afford to take seriously the possibility that you weren't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he didn't want to end up in that pickle of like, what if I'm forced to report something that is going to make me look right? Like I'm one of them. And now I can't be credible covering a city council hearing if I've said that I've seen, for instance, like a little green man, right?
Yeah, I can imagine there's a real problem for any journalist encountering an authentic phenomenon that's unbelievable to the average person.
Yeah, I mean, when I was out with Lou, for instance, there was and it sounds like it so much sounds like something out of a movie, Jeffrey, that like it's hard to talk about, right? But it happened. And he told me that there was, and that's like such bullshit. He told me there was a guy who we were visiting this old state mental hospital that had fallen into complete and total disrepair, right? I mean, nature claims an old building quickly when it is no longer being used. And he told me that in the years since the place had closed, a worker had been in this particular area and was using the stairs, and the stairs collapsed and he fell to his death, right? And he was going to try and set us up there and talk to this guy. And I was like, were there any articles about this, right? Like I remember early on, like I checked, I think the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I didn't see any reports on it. But we go there and he was using electronic voice phenomenon, right? So he's using EVP. He would talk into this recorder and talk about a busted filter, by the way. Lou is someone that I encountered things with Lou that neither of us could explain, right? Which could potentially count as evidence that, okay, there's something going on here, right? And, but Lou also had this, when we talk about the cracked filter, he had this sort of addiction almost to his recorder. And it just struck me that what we were getting from it mostly was, just white noise and garble, right? And you could occasionally make out a word in it, but that to me was just like a product of a random, most of the time, let's say that, 98% of the time was clearly just like sort of random pattern matching, right? It sounds a little like a word. So we're in this area late at night, and he's trying to get some kind of reaction, and not much is happening. So he's like saying in his recorder, are you here? Give us some kind of signal if you're here, like all this sort of standard stuff. And then after about 10 minutes with nothing, he says something like, do you go to Best Buy to get your wireless routers on sale? Right? Nothing. Like now he's just sort of throwing stuff against the wall. And then he says, as I remember it, do you even know that you're dead? And suddenly there's a boom in the stairwell with the broken stairs, right? We looked at it. They were broken stairs. There's a boom in the stairwell. Lou's big admonition to me always, Jeff is like, don't freak out, right? That's what he told me before we went out together at all. He's just, remember, no matter what, don't freak out. It was a big boom, man. And the kind that, like, even if you're not there ghost hunting, if you're in a space and suddenly there's a boom like that, you stiffen, right? You go into an immediate kind of fight or flight. So I'd stiffened, and I remember, I'll never forget Lou going real low, don't freak out. And then slap, like another big sound, almost as if at the top of the stairs in the doorway sort of area. And then just a few seconds pass, and then like a big boom just feet from us. And I was totally stunned. It stopped. I don't know what that was. There was certainly nothing dropped from the ceiling. There was no, but these sounds occurred. And I ended up finding an article in the Northeast Times that a guy really did die. A workman fell through that stairwell and died, right? And I will tell you this now, right? I believe that something happened there that validates the idea of going out there at 2 a.m. Absolutely, right? Do I believe that is a valid pursuit? Absolutely, yes, I do. And I'll also point out that we spent so many hours there over so many weekends, and it's not like something happened every time, right? But anyway, but do I know that it was a ghost, let alone that actual guy? No, I don't. And again, I think it's just that openness to, and the openness to the thrill of it, frankly, the openness to the thrill of possibility that like, that was though something. And it's not explained by anything I've been able to figure out.
Well, as a journalist, did you leave that part out of your book?
And I think it's in the book and also an article I wrote for Philadelphia Magazine at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, the sort of thing that I left out of the book. Would you like to let's venture down that path?
Sure.
So one of the craziest experiences I had, and I'll write about it at some point. To be honest, I've already written about it. It's on my hard drive, right? But I haven't published it anywhere. I was in my late 20s. I'd been laid off from my first reporting job. The paper had been sold. And the new owners, there was an editor there from the rival paper who was taking over the paper, and they were happy to lay me off, right? And so I had no job, and put down by my rivals, and I was pursuing some work there where I lived at the time in Pittsburgh, and I was also having conversations with people in Philadelphia who had a paper there that I really wanted to work for. And I go to bed one night, and it's absolutely like I am bereft, right? Because the job I've been pursuing in Pittsburgh had just told me the week before, look, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to happen, right? And then the people in Philly had been telling me, like, look, it's going to be a long time till we have it in our budget to add somebody. And both those conversations had happened the previous week. So I go to bed and I have a dream, an unbelievably vivid dream, in which I woke up in the morning and was having coffee, and then my phone rang. And it was the guy with the job in Pittsburgh just saying, hey, why don't we grab lunch? Not saying I'm going to give you a job, nothing, just, you got time to meet me for lunch today. So in the dream, I said yes. And the next thing I know, we're there at this restaurant having lunch, and in the dream, and he offers me a job, and I take it. He's changed his mind, right? He wants to hire me. So I take the job, and in the dream, I come home, and the phone rings, and it's the editor in Philadelphia telling me they want me to hire me to come out there. And so I get 2 job offers in the dream, right? And from people who have told me it ain't happening, right? One, it's never happening. The other, it's not happening anytime soon. And I know which one I want. I want the Philly one, right? And so I wake up and I'm like, man, that would be great if that happened, And I get my cup of coffee and the phone rings. And it's the guy with the job in Pittsburgh, and he asked me to meet him for lunch. Same freaking restaurant. You know what I mean? Like, same restaurant that had been in the dream. So this is like totally the opposite of deja vu. It's not like after all these things happen, I'm like, oh, that was in my dream. No, I saw it coming. So, dude, I came home from getting the job in Pittsburgh. Like, I kind of opened the door. I was like almost sneaking into my own place. Like, is the phone going to ring again? Right? This is an era, kids, when we had wall phones that were plugged into the wall, right? I wasn't walking around with one in my pocket. And the phone rings, like shortly after getting home, and it's the editor in Philly, and they offer me the job. And it was crazy because I'll never forget being like, when the phone rang, I was like, hello? And it was Sarah, right? This editor I was hoping to hear from, and I'm like, Sarah, hi. You know what I mean? And I'm like waiting for her to say it, because like, wow, she's really going to say it. And then she said it. And so like, you can give me the skeptical explanation all you want, that we have millions of dreams, and I'm happy to be somebody who remembers my dreams. And sometimes by coincidence, something like this might happen. You could give me an explanation, and you know what? I'll even tell you it's possible. Sure, that's possible. But what's the other possibility? Which to me is every bit, at least every bit, given how this one went down, as real. I saw it coming. And I got a glimpse of what was actually going to happen that day. And I'm more than a glimpse. I mean, it was a long, vivid dream. I don't know what do you make of it?
It was obviously, from my point of view, a very clear and detailed and precise precognition.
Yeah.
And you left it out of your book.
I did. And someday I'll write about that and some other things that have happened, right? And again, I've already written about them. I just have to like collect them and shove them into a new book. But because, I'm ready to sort of out myself on it. And I think, and I'll tell you, I had somebody ask me once, because I relayed some of these stories from some talk I gave, and they were like, dude, are you like maybe too given to rationalization? Like you present yourself, right? You present yourself as being so open to these things, and you've got this like treasure trove of experiences. And yet you yourself to some degree are holding them at arm's length, right? Even though I will fight like hell against the kind of skeptical dismissal of it, because it's total bullshit. Like, it's total bullshit. We just don't know, right? Where that came from, how it happened, what it was. And there's no way I accept just as, oh yeah, coincidence, and I'm just going to march on, right?
Well, I assume that you didn't publish it in your book when you originally wrote the book over a decade ago because you thought it would damage your credibility.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like this is a time I want to show what journalism can do. And journalism is usually about telling other people's stories. So that's the main motivation. And maybe it was just the rationalization, Jeffrey. But it was the main motivation to keep too much of the personal stuff, or to keep the personal stuff out, right? Except for the family ghost story, which really presented an intriguing opportunity because I had the chance to report on it. I could go back, because my memories of it were fairly fragmentary. I could go back, talk to my brother, talk to my sister, talk to, you know what I mean? And report on it. And because even though I had memories of it, it mostly happened to other people, if that makes sense, because they had an awareness of it that I didn't. And so that was the main driver at the time, actually, because it's important to me. And I think it's one of the ways that journalism can sort of help save itself. Like, we're so polarized right now, and there's so much skepticism about journalists and our motivations and all this sort of stuff. And I think one of the reasons is because it's almost as if in this realm, we have held ourselves as somehow separate and apart from the human experience, which includes wrestling with these existential questions. Are we alone in the universe? Is there life after we die? Is there some kind of communication, or, are we more than meat? I mean, for a lot of scientists, the standard philosophical view right now, and like this sort of neuroscience crowd, that there's no free will and all this, we're basically, we're cows. We're cows who can create paintings. You know what I mean? But we're like, there's not much going on here, right? And I think I personally do believe that we're more than meat, right? And that there's something going on here, but I can't claim that I know it. And I just think that's an important distinction to continue to make.
Well, Steve, this has been a very enlightening conversation. It makes me think that probably most people are like yourself, that they have interesting stories to tell. And if you keep probing, you'll find that there's another story behind the interesting story that's even more interesting, that they themselves haven't shared yet.
Yeah. I've taken the opportunity when I can still, like to engage people on these topics, right? And the thing that I think, again, that journalism misses is that most people have some story like this or associated with these sort of things that they keep close.
I would say 75% of the population have had dramatic paranormal experiences, most of which get sort of pushed out of awareness.
So Lou, who I've talked about a lot in this conversation, I certainly miss him. He passed away. Lou, one of the things that we got close around and bonded around is we talked about the phenomenon of how when you have something like this happen, it initially hits you like a bolt of lightning. And I will tell you, Jeffrey, the day that I had that dream, I had no doubt about the jobs. I had no doubt that I was plugged into the universe. None. I felt it in my bones and in my DNA that I saw it coming, and I walked into that apartment the way I did, waiting for that second phone call because I was like expecting it, by virtue, and it happened. And it's afterward, right? It's afterward when we go back to the mundane reality, right? In which everything does just kind of ping pong in a predictable fashion, right? And it's atoms and billiard balls, right? And all this sort of stuff. And nothing so unexpected occurs, right? Nothing so beyond the pale occurs. And we start to think, well, maybe it wasn't what it felt like at the time, and tell ourselves a different story.
Well, it's very important to remember those special experiences, and I'm so glad that you shared it with me and with our New Thinking Aloud audience.
I really appreciate the chance to come on and spend some time with you. Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure, Steve. I look forward to more of your journalistic output in the future and hope to have you on as a guest more times on New Thinking Aloud.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You have a great day.
You too. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.